Our nation faces real energy challenges. While abundant, alternative energy sources surround us, Lockheed Martin has a broad portfolio of alternative energy generation solutions: solar energy, wave power, ocean thermal energy conversion, and synthetic fuels.
Welcome to the Green Utility Webcast. My name is Michael Burr. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Public Utilities Fortnightly magazine. Today I'm talking with Steve Anderson, our contributing editor, who recently spoke with Kurt Yeager, former president of the Electric Power Research Institute, about what he's working on at the Galvin Electricity Initiative. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Michael.
Did I get all that right? Is it the Galvin Electricity Initiative?
That's right, and it was founded in 2005 by Bob Galvin, the former CEO of Motorola, actually the son of the founder of Motorola, and kind of a pioneer in the cellular telephone industry. And I guess the fundamental conceit of the Galvin Initiative is to try to bring about a similar transformation in the utility sector that happened in telecom when that market was deregulated in the breakup of the bells at the end of the 70s, early 80s. That led to, of course, a wave of innovation, all kinds of new players getting involved, and a completely transformed consumer experience of telecommunications. They're hoping that they can do the same thing for electricity.
Interesting. Well, so what makes this a story for green utility then? I haven't heard you say anything about renewable energy.
Well, it's in a lot of ways it is. I mean, their fundamental goal is to have something that is reliable, cheap, and green and clean. And a big part of what they're focused on is efficiency. It's interesting in that they're focusing on the business model and the grid before renewables, because they believe that you have to do that to get anywhere near the optimal efficiency out of renewables. In fact, why don't I let Bob or Kurt Yeager speak to that directly with a comment on why they don't see renewables as the top priority right now.
I served on the National Academy's Renewable Energy Study a couple of years ago, and we concluded that getting more than single-digit percentages of intermittent renewable energy, which is solar power, wind power, would really not be possible today. We would have to build so much backup gas power or storage capacity that we don't have the technology for, that we would be very limited in terms of the quantity of renewable energy.
So basically, his point there is all the money that utilities are investing in these utility scale intermittent plants, whether it's wind or solar, it can only reach a fairly limited percentage of the overall generation pie until you get these overall grid efficiencies, at which point it could become a massive part of the mix, 20, 30, 40% down the road.
Right. Okay. So I understand that he talks a fair amount. I've spoken with him before, and I've heard him speak. He mentions a number of different ways how the regulatory structure and the business model ultimately of the utility industry isn't really designed in a way to encourage utilities to become more efficient, but instead incentivizes utilities to generate more power, to build more capacity. So what's his solution? Is he essentially saying that revenue decoupling is the answer? What is he getting at?
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, this is something that we talk about all the time whenever we deal with smart grid or renewables, is you run into the business models. And I'll let him give a quick comment on that right now.
The issue is not technology. The issue is the lack of incentive, this captive monopoly business model. The utilities are still, for the most part, incented to maximize the sale of electricity, and not the quality of service.
The point basically is all technologically possible. A lot of the smart grid, the renewables, it's not the technology is the problem. It's the way that utility businesses are structured and regulated. And he lays that fairly squarely at the feet of utilities. It's not like utilities like to paint themselves as not being in control of this, as beholden to their regulators and legislatures, but they can be bigger drivers in this process. And in my conversation with him, he really said that utilities have kicked this can down the road for a long time, and they can't do that anymore. What they need to do is sit down and have a very serious conversation, not just with their regulators, but with their stakeholders about transforming that value proposition. And the belief there is that there's a lot more money in the industry for utilities if they embrace this.
Interesting. So by stakeholders, you're talking about shareholders as well as customers.
Shareholders of IOUs, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Kurt was the president of EPRI for many years. He was at EPRI for 30 years, and his board of directors was largely utility company CEOs.
Right.
And they would tell him, well, I agree with you in principle, but if I did this, my board would fire me. That is not necessarily sound thinking. If you can come up with a better business case, your board, your shareholders should back you, and that's the job of utility company executives. Is they've got to come up with the business case and sell their constituencies on it.
It sounds like a lot of what Yeager is saying echoes what I hear a lot of consultants talk about when they refer to transformation of the industry.
That's right.
And it's a bit of a buzzword, frankly, that can mean different things to different people. But I think generally it seems to imply a change in the utility business model, to some degree away from a central hub and spoke kind of model toward more distributed resources and a smarter grid and potentially a greener grid. But from what I understand and from what I'm hearing you say, Kurt Yeager seems to think that it is a bigger and more important subject than what I hear a lot of consultants talk about.
They think that the numbers that they're throwing out are massive. This transformation. Yeager's number says that nationally that would take $500 billion, and within 2 years, it would recoup $2 trillion. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling. I don't know how those numbers got crunched, but that's what they say. They expect a 4 or 5 to 1 return on investment in fairly short order for this type of transformation. And that's not talking about new market innovators or bringing in, new businesses. That is all through, recovering productivity losses, efficiency losses, and a broader incorporation of generation sources, including renewables.
Interesting. It kind of seems counterintuitive since renewables, in almost all cases, are more expensive than fossil fuel sources or nuclear, with the exception of large hydropower, which a lot of people don't.
And we talk about that a lot. We talk about the declining cost of renewables. The focus for what they're talking about in Perfect Power, really, though, is efficiency first. The integration of renewables is really on a distributed basis. A big part of this is turning buildings, whether residential or commercial, into net energy producers. Their entire concept is built around microgrids and demonstrating the value proposition of this on a small scale. They have actually done this in more than a half a dozen instances in the 5-6 years they've been up and running. The first one that they did, which was kind of their jumpstart, was a project at the Illinois Institute of Technology campus in Chicago. Mm-hmm. IIT is right there in South Chicago. They basically created the microgrid for them. I mean, Galvin it's a nonprofit, but they partner with their clients to come up with the design for these systems. That design began implementation in 2008. It's about half installed so far, and IIT is expecting a 3 to 1 return on investment. They've already had some substantial savings. I mean, it's a fairly compact urban campus, and they're saving $500,000 in outage, prevention a year, reliability savings. They've also been able to sell their power. They have gas backup plants. They've been able to sell that on the day-ahead market there with their local ISO, PJM in Chicago. That efficiency has also allowed the local IOU, ComEd, to put off developing 2 new substations that were needed in South Chicago. So by putting these things into the real world and demonstrating the actual cost savings, they're hoping that the idea spreads.
Well, so it sounds from that like the transformation is happening essentially at a commercial and industrial level as well as the utility level. Does the consumer play a big role in this transformed power grid that Galvin and Yeager are talking about?
Absolutely. I mean, the consumer they really are focused on the consumer. I mean, by focusing on a microgrid, they're trying to transform the consumer experience first and foremost so that they can realize a lot of the things that we frequently talk about in smart grid and home energy management and net metering especially. And they've done this in several municipalities, I think, with local co-ops of sorts. In Naperville, Illinois, they've been able to do a transformation with no rate impact for the consumers there. They've also got projects in Leesburg, Florida, 3 different locations in New Mexico and Austin, Texas. Those are all municipalities.
So Bob Galvin, actually being the former CEO of Motorola, he comes at this from sort of a point of view of the telecom industry and the transformation that happened there. So I gather that the argument that's frequently brought up is the cell phone argument, that we wouldn't be where we are today in the telecommunications industry with a font of all knowledge in everyone's pocket without deregulation in the industry.
That's exactly right.
And ultimately a transformation in the way that communication services are delivered and used. I have a bit of a problem with that analogy in that electricity ultimately is a commodity, and it's not fun, it's not a toy, it's not even really a value add, it's a commodity. So what am I missing? What is it about their analogy that really applies to the transformation of the utility industry?
It's not a totally clean analogy. I mean, I asked him about the fact that you don't really have the potential for a top-down regulatory solution in the utility industry the way that a single antitrust case was able to deregulate, telecom. But I think the fundamental core of that is it's about innovation. It's about entrepreneurship. It's about bringing new players into it. If you can affect the business model enough, you can bring in fresh thinking and stimulate a transformation that's going to happen much, much more quickly and more meaningfully than if it is just completely driven by the utilities themselves.
Okay. So it's about really opening the door to entrepreneurship and innovation in a way that the current utility model really doesn't.
That's exactly the point.
Interesting. Okay. Well, Steve, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this is Michael Burr signing off for Fortnightly's Green Utility.